Hey, what's up everyone? Never Late here. And in this video, we will be learning how to deploy a Ruby on Rails application to Microsoft Azure. We'll take a Rails 7 application, deploy it to Azure App Service while hosting our data within an Azure Managed SQL database. Let's get started. All right, so if I hop over to my terminal, what we will do is we'll go ahead and initialize this Rails application. So what I want to do is let's go ahead and begin a new Rails application. So let's just say Rails new. We'll call this a Azure. We'll call this Rails on Azure. And we'll go ahead and initialize this with the Postgres database as well. So I'm just doing a no-frills Rails application off the bat, not really anything fancy. The only thing that I'm going to be changing here is just instead of a SQLite server, we'll be just using a Postgres database. Beautiful. So off the bat, off to a great start. So instead, let's just add, oh my gosh, like type. So kick it off, and now we can see that we're creating the application. And I'm not going to do kind of my goal here is that we're just going to get this up and running on Azure. Most of the application should already come set up for being able to handle all your CSS through the asset pipeline and any JavaScript through the import maps that are there. Stimulus and Hotwired are already installed. I'm just doing the basic Rails 7 default application. Just to show as well, the Ruby version that I'm using for this one is going to be Ruby 3.1.2. So again, we're using Rails 7.1.3.4 with Ruby 3.1.2. So if you are not matching these versions directly, you may have a couple of differences. So just keep that in mind depending on the type of application or the type of version dependencies that you plan to use. So I'm going to go ahead and CD into our application that I had, which was called like Rails on Azure. And let's go and open this sucker up. All right, so the first thing that I want to do is go ahead and get this running just to make sure that it works off the bat. So we'll hop over to our terminal again. So now what I want to do is just go ahead and run the server. That way I can just test out that our application works. So I can see that we're listening on port 3000, and let's go ahead and click on this localhost page. Looks like we got an error already. All right, no database name I can see, so I forgot to create the database. Let's go ahead and do that. So what I'll type in is, let me go ahead and clear this out. I'll do a Rails DB create. Creates that development and test databases for me with this command. So now I've created the database. Let's go ahead and try Rails server again. Oh, wrong one. Refresh the page. Awesome. We get that beautiful Rails logo. Cool. So it seems like I have the database created. So now I want to go ahead and scaffold a blog with a title and description just to have something that we can see and make sure that we have an example application that we can use and to make sure it works in a typical fashion. So I'm not going to be doing anything crazy with this Rails application. Really, I'm just going to scaffold that blog, get that containerized and pushed up to Azure. So what I want to do is a Rails generates scaffold. Let's go ahead and call this a blog. Let's give it a title as a string. Without defining the string here, you don't really need to do this with Rails. The default will be a string. Say description as well. So this generation, what I should see is it'll create me a bunch of files. Looks like it will set up all of the correct actions for a blog. So that's, index, show, edit, new, and it'll create all of the views that it needs for the blog, as well as all of the controller actions that we need for the blog, and set up our routes too. So I can also see that it should have done something to edit the routes. Oh yeah, and I can see here that resource route, that the routes have been created actually. So let's just hop over to our code and see, what I changed here. So if I head over to routes.rb, that's kind of listed under our config section. I have resources blogs here. Just to make it a little bit clearer for us, let's go ahead and move this further down. And let's just say our roots, I'm going to change this root to instead be, let's just say blogs index. So rather than all I'm doing for this root path is just defining the blogs that we just created, making sure that the initial page is going to be that list of blogs. So I can see, the Rails routes have been created here. If I go to the blogs controller, it's one that was also created for us. We have our index. We have a show, new, edit, create, setup for us, update as well, destroy. So let's just go ahead and test it out, see what this looks like on the actual application. What better way to test than to manually test in this case? So let's go ahead and hop back to our terminal. Let's take a Rails server. Let's open this up in our browser. And beautiful. One other thing I forgot to do. Let's go and run our migrations. So let's hop back to the console. Let's run Rails DB migrate. And this migration is just to create that blob table. So let's try that Rails server again. This trial and error is the way to go. I'll hop back to my browser, refresh, beautiful. I can see that root is hitting that new blog. Let's go ahead and create a new blog. Let's just say a new blog. Awesome. So I can see here, blog has successfully created. You can destroy this blog as well. So, all right. So now that we've tested that the blogs application is up and running in our localhost, what I want to do is just to make sure that the assets pipeline is compiling and pulling down CSS correctly when we push it to production. Let's go in and throw an align to change this H1 header into, I don't know, blue or some other thing that we need just to show that CSS is compiling and showing up on as part of the assets. Head back to the editor. Let's go to application.css, because what better place to throw all of our CSS into the same one. We're just going to say H1 here. Let's just give this a color blue. So hop back to our terminal. Let's restart it. Let's take a look at what this looks like. Let's refresh. Awesome. Looks like that header was able to take. That's all the CSS I'm going to add. I am not planning to win any awards here with design. So, all right. So now that we see that we have our blogs running, right, we are able to create a new blog. The best blog yet, have a description of an even better blog than the one before. If I create this blog, I'm able to see when blog has been created. I'm on the blog show page, which is a single blog. I can go back to blogs, has my list of blogs, show this blog, and I can also destroy this blog. So those CRUD actions are working on the Rails application. So now what I would like to do is discuss more on how we're going to get this app running in production in an Azure App Service with our data hosted in a separate PostgreSQL database that is also managed by Azure. To get started with the Azure piece, the first thing that you're going to need to do, which I have already done myself, is to set up an Azure subscription. So if you head to azure.microsoft.com, I think you can just get there from typing this in. You'll be taken to the homepage of here, and then if you look for the top right, you should see try Azure for free. This will take you to a new page, and you can click on start free. So once you click on start free, this should take you through a series of steps to be able to set up your Azure subscription. So once you have that, let us hop on to where you should appear. So once you have set up your Azure subscription, what you should see is when you head to your Azure portal, this should be a landing site that you see. And if you look here, you have the subscriptions button. So you can click on subscriptions, and this will take you to the subscription that you had just created. Feel free to rename it anything. It should be a pretty arbitrary name that doesn't really make sense to you. So what you're able to do is just click into the subscription. And you can click on rename. And for me, I just renamed it to Nevalate Test, make it, something that's more sensical. Another way you can get to the subscription tab is just being able to type into the search bar as well. So if you're not able to find it from this overall view as this tab, you can find it from the search area as well. So the first thing that we're going to need to do to be able to deploy anything to Azure is to create a resource group. And a resource group is just more of a logical grouping of any type of Azure resources that makes sense to your business use case. So in this case, I'm just going to create this resource group. I can type in group here. Let's see if this will pop it up for me. Click onto resource group. Let's create a resource group. I'm just going to call this let's just call this Navigate Rails Azure RG. You can choose what region you're in, and so I will say East US for the deployment of where this is. Click on Review and Create. Let's create that resource group. So once it's been created, you should see on the top right, it should say resource group created. We can go to our resource group. So now, again, the resources that we want to create on Azure are going to be that Azure App Service. We'll also need an Azure Container Registry as well. And the reason we'll need an Azure Container Registry is that Azure App Service currently does not have a supported Ruby runtime directly on the app service. And the only way that we're going to be able to get our Ruby application running, our Ruby on Rails application running on Azure, is that we'll need to utilize it in a containerized format. So we'll build our Ruby on Rails application as a Docker image, upload it to an Azure Container Registry, and then pull that image down and run it within Azure App Service. The last resource that we're going to need to create is going to be an Azure managed PostgreSQL server. So let's go ahead and let's start from the back of that. So let's go ahead and create a Postgres. So if you just type into, if I head back, so from here, what we can do is just click on create. This will take us to the marketplace. We can search for Postgres. Postgres will take us to filter that query for us, and we can see here that we have an Azure database for PostgreSQL, and this is what we want. Since it's a managed PostgreSQL for us, let's go ahead and do that. And we'll be able to see the amount of estimated costs, which for the current SKU that we're using is quite ridiculous. And I'm sorry, I don't have that much money since I'm just starting off on YouTube. What I want to do is go ahead and configure this server. I'm going to change the compute tier here. I'm going to change it to burstable compute size. I'm going to try to go as small as possible. So it looks like standard B1MS, sorry. And everything else looks pretty standard. I guess premium SD, it's the same price. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. I'll keep that as premium SSD. No backups for here. Just trying to keep this as simple as possible. So let's go ahead and save this. And we need to give our server a name. So let's just call this Azure Rails Postgres. Region of East US, same region as our resource group. SQL version is 16. We'll keep this as production. Compute and storage we already configured. Helped to bring down that cost a bit. Still a little expensive, but we got that 750 hours ourselves. No availability zones. And then for the authentication piece, let's just use Postgres authentication only. I'll just call this Postgres admin. Be the name here. Super secret password. Super secret passwords. Review and create. Now that's deployments in progress. Awesome. So we got our PostgreSQL database currently provisioning for us. Now let's go ahead and deploy the other resources. So while this is deployment, it is in progress site, you have a resource group here. Let's just go ahead and click on that resource group. This will take us back to here. We don't see that resource yet because it's still provisioning and still deploying it within Azure. You can see this notification tab on the right side here on our nav bar. It does say deployment in progress, which is referring to that SQL server. So the next resource I want to create is going to be the container registry. So let's go ahead and click on that create button again. We'll type in container registry. Click create. So it'll take us into here. I'm just going to call this Rails Azure ACR. East US again, standard. I'm going to switch this to basic. Yeah. And then let's go ahead and click on create. I hope that didn't submit 2 deployments. Okay, fine. Looks like it just created one. Careful with double clicking, I suppose. So now we want to click on the resource group again here. Oh, deployment is complete. So we saw that deployment happen. So what we can do is just go to resource. That was faster than I thought it would be. And here's our container registry. So I'm not going to do anything quite yet. We're just setting up our Azure resources. So from here, what we can do is also click on the resource group and go back to our resource group. We'll see that Rails Azure ACR already spun up for us. And let's go ahead and create the last one. Is going to be the app service. So we can type in app service in the marketplace again. And what we should see, let's narrow this down. What we're really creating is a web app. And we have here web app plus database. We're doing this piecemeal, so let's just go ahead and here we're needing a container. Let's click create. You can click on the Nevalate Rails Azure RG, which is the one I've been using to deploy all my current resources for this video. We'll just name this the Nevalate Rails Azure App. It's a very long and winded name, I'm sure, but it is what it is. Nevalate Rails Azure App is the name of the instance of this web app, and I have it as a container. This operating system will choose Linux, will deploy to East US. Pricing plan. We have the basic one, which is we don't need anything more than that for currently. And of course, another thing that you can hopefully do is like and subscribe when you get a chance. That would be fantastic. All right, so let's continue. Once I see that I have the Nevalate Rails Azure app, let's go ahead and review and create. I'm deploying the name of my app again. So what also deploys with the web app is also going to provision an app service plan for us. So if we take a look at the documentation, go to Azure App Services, service plans. Let's just try to click on Google. Let's find this one. So what the app service plan will define is going to be just that operating system, whatever region you're deploying that app service to, the number of VM instances and the size of those instances, and the pricing tiers. So most of, I would say, the underlying configuration of like the infrastructure that the web app will run on, the app service plan is what will define that configuration in those settings. And let's go ahead and create a web app. So this is deploying. Can hop back to my resource group too while it's deploying. And I also now see my Azure Rails PostgreSDB. All right, now that I have all three of the services that I wanted to deploy deployed, what we will need to do now is let's head back to the Rails application that we had previously spun up, and let's get it containerized and Dockerized. All right, Nevalate from the future here. I just wanted to be able to point out that specifically for this tutorial, we are using Rails 7.1. This comes with the ability of creating a Docker file automatically with your Rails application. So this is pretty paramount because for Azure App Services, it currently does not support Ruby runtimes, and we will require a Dockerized Rails application. So make sure to use 7.1. If not, if you're not able to do that, what I would recommend is head to the Rails repo itself, and under railties lib Rails generators Rails app templates dockerfile.tt. You can also search for dockerfile.tt here. And in this version, what you should be able to see, at least in this version, under the templates, is you can get a pretty good gist of the creation of the Docker file itself. So you'll be able to kind of take this example if yours wasn't created and stitch together a Docker file. But I will be under the impression that you're using Rails 7.1. All right, now back to the development. So now let's begin the process of Dockerizing our Rails application to deploy it to Azure. So automatically with Rails 7.1, a Docker file will be generated for us. And just as a gist of this file, what we do is using Ruby version 3.1.2, it will build this image as a production environment, and then it will just go through and store up the dependencies and get it running for us as we expect it to. So feel free to, if you've been following along and created your own Rails application, take a deeper look into this yourself. If you want more experience with Docker, that is not the purpose of this video. We are just going to be using this generated Docker file for us, which will automatically build the Rails application with the dependencies in the style that we need it to be able to run this in production. So we're just using everything that Rails will automatically generate for us. I'm not planning to really do anything above and beyond regarding Docker in this regard. So let's just go ahead and continue on from there. So the next thing we need to do is we need to prep our database to be able to read from Postgres itself. So given that we are using this production environment for the Rails application, I'm just going to head and ignore some security concerns, and that Azure PostgreSQL database that we have spun up, we're going to use that one to, so if I go to, for example, resource groups, to that resource group that we had created, I have this Azure Rails PostgreSQL database that we spun up. If I go to connect, we're going to be pulling back these credentials, and we're going to use the containerized Docker image that we build to connect to our remote Azure hosted PostgreSQL database. So this is the one we're going to be using for production. So just to test out from the production application in our cases before we actually deploy it to apps, to Azure App Services, we'll just connect directly there. Again, I'm not doing this in the most secure fashion, so I do not recommend this if you are having, I do not recommend to use your production database to do this directly. If you wanted to test this out, I would spin up a development version of your database or something in that regard. So let's just use these settings that we have. So I'm going to head back to my editor. So let's just use these settings that I have. So let's go ahead and copy these connection details. I can click on the copy button here. And let's go back to our editor. And in the editor, I'm just going to open up a blank file, just post that in. And let's start to add these into our Rails database as environment variables. So if I go to our database.yaml, which is under the config here, and I'm going to be doing something that I probably should have done a while ago, is let's go ahead and commit everything that I have not committed yet. So just to clean up on our Rails application, which is something I haven't really been doing, is I'm just going to make an initial commit for what we've created. So let's just do a git add, git commit, init Rails. Let's go back to our editor. Now that I've kind of already just did an initial commit, that way I can clean up all of the green files here I wasn't really paying attention to. Now having copied these values over, what we need to do is just prepare our production database. So what we're going to do is add in an extra property to our production. So what we need is also a host, because our host is going to be associated with our Azure PostgreSQL database. So what that host here is basically like, let's say that URL that will connect to our Postgres database that we set up on Azure. We have our PG user, and our PG database, and our PG password. So what we're going to do is just parameterize these and make them environment variables for our Rails app to read. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the one from the password, post this here. I need to do an app setting underscore Azure, oh no, not that. Let's just call this DB host. App setting DB password for the password. Apps. And actually, let's just copy this whole line here. Let's do app setting DB user. and app setting DB database, our DB, let's say name for the database name. So the reason that we need this app setting underscore is that is a app service, Azure App Service convention that we have to do to expose these environment variables to our Rails application. So if you take a look at kind of the documentation from there, if you were to, for example, Google environment variables, Azure App Service, you'll get pulled up to the first link. You can show more in this article. You can see the variable prefixes, and there's an explanation on why you need to have that prefix for your app variables. So even though that it is specifying .NET here, this is something that you have to do with any custom containerized application. So given that that's the type of application we're deploying, and that's something that is a convention by Azure App Service, that's what we're going to use. So now that I've prepared I prepared my config for my database, what I want to do is go ahead and build this Docker application. So I'll go ahead and say Docker build. We'll take the root of our directory, so period, and, oh, sorry, I did that wrong, Docker build -t. So the T is just the name of the image and that we want to create. So let's just call this Rails on Azure v1, period. If you're not familiar with any of Docker commands, what this is saying is that I'm just building from I'm starting the build from the context of the current directory I'm in, and I'm giving my Docker image this name. So again, this isn't, I'm not going to be doing a deep dive into Docker and in the process of how do you create a Docker file or anything. We're just using what is given to us by Rails. So possibly in a future video, that's something I'll be able to cover. If that's so please comment down below if that's something that you want to see. If not, then yeah. So now that I have my image running, let's go ahead and take this and we'll go ahead and clear. Let's just see what happens if we try to run this off the bat. So just take Docker run Rails on Azure v1. So it looks like we get an error here, and what this is saying is that we need to have a secret key base when we're looking to run in a production environment. So you can generate that secret key, if I just ran it again, by doing Rails secret, and this will give you a value back. I'll just use this. I'm going to cycle all of these or even destroy the environment afterwards. So please do not try to copy this down because it probably will not work when you try to use it. So definitely run yours. I recommend not showing it in public. You should definitely put this either as a legitimate environment variable or hiding this from any public viewing. So I'll take this value, and what we're going to do is we're going to just start to kind of build other ones. So you can say export. I'm just using this as kind of a scratch file. So what I will, so now that we have this Rails secret, what we're going to do is try to run this Docker image and get rid of this error. So we can say Docker run. And there's something I also forgot is I need to bind my local 3000 port, since that is the port that Rails exposes. Let's give this an environment variable. And we'll say that the environment variable is going to be the secret key base. And that is something that Rails will automatically read for us, luckily. And so if I just run this, and then let's do one more, and then let's give it the name of the Docker image that we want to run. Awesome. So the next error we get looks like it accepted our secret key base with this environment variable. I still have another error. It looks like it cannot connect to our Postgres database. So let's go ahead and take the values that we've copied from before, such as the PG host, PG user, PG port that we've copied from our Azure Postgres database, and let's go ahead and create a command for Docker. So I'm going to go ahead and copy what I had before, paste it here. It's a good starting point. So I'm just going to change this to shell so it looks a little nicer for us. All right, so there we go. I have the first environment variable. I want to create the next series of ones. So I'm just going to go back to my database file. Let's go ahead and copy these app settings here. So these are the four that I'm going to need. Copy, paste, and gonna span 4 cursors. We'll do an E equals this. That way we have nice. So app setting DB name, that's gonna be the name of the database. We can call this Postgres. It's the name of the database that we're going to be using. We have the user. The user is going to be Postgres admin. The password is my super secret one that I had. Again, don't expect to connect to this when this video drops. It's not going to work. So, and don't share these passwords. I highly recommend not to do this. Don't follow my footsteps with that. But at least for the sake of this video, it is what it is. Awesome. So, great. Now let's just fix this up a little bit. Push these over. Brilliant, brilliant. All right, now that we've prepared our Docker CLI run command to run our Rails on Azure application, setting up that config from the database, let's copy this command and let's head over to our terminal. So now on our terminal, let's go ahead and paste this command. And again, we have this Docker command that we're going to run, so go ahead and run it. And we will get this error. Okay, so extension PLPGSQL is not allowed listed for our Azure database for Postgres. So let's head over to the browser and see how we can fix that. So from the Azure PostgreSQL Server instance or Azure resource, what we'll do is we'll click into server parameters here. Go down to Azure extensions, I believe. So let's just filter by extension. Azure.extensions is what I'm looking for. And we're going to match this with the PLP. This is kind of annoying to try to get since I have a sensitive mouse. All right, so we see here PLPGSQL. Let's go ahead and tap that. Let's save. And it's going to submit the deployment and update our SQL Server database. And this might take a bit, so I don't know how long it's going to take. So let's just wait and find out. I guess what we can do is just try to keep running the application. So let's head back. I'll just go ahead and run this command again. Hey, looks like we connected. Awesome. So we have this going and listening on 0.0.0. So let's go ahead and click into that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy this here. Let's head to our browser. Let's open it up. Can't provide a secure connection. All right, so let's take a look at our browser. Our terminal, sorry, to see what's happening. It looks like there's an issue with SSL connection. So I think I know what we need to do. Let's head over to our VS Code terminal. Let's go back to, I think we'll need to head to our, it's not under assets, it's going to be a configuration issue. And I think that's under environments. Let's click into production.rb. Force SSL true. I'm going to turn this off. One really nice thing with Azure App Service is that it will it terminates it will basically terminate SSL at the application level. At the service level. So it's not something that we need to configure. So you're able to have an HTTP application. They will force TLS and SSL at that point when you're routing to the Azure App Service. So luckily that's not something like setting up an SSL certificate is not something that we need to do manually. So comment that out. What we need to do though is we need to make a change to our database. So let's go ahead and build our image again. So since I commented that line out, let's head back to our hyper. Let's go ahead and build this image. I'm going to go ahead and clear here. So Gonna reverse for builds. I'll just keep the v1 because not much has really changed yet. It hasn't got a full working container, for example. So now let's go ahead and try to run our Docker command again for spinning up our Docker run container. So now let's just go to here, and what we're going to go to instead is to 127.0.0.1. Yeah, so if I go to 127.0.0.1 at 3000, that takes. Awesome. So we're connecting, and I can see, for example, let's see if this works. Let's a new blog on PSQL, a new blog on Azure. Let's create the blog. It takes. So if we hop over, let's go ahead and take a look at here. Let's go to databases, and let's go to our Postgres database. I can connect here. Type in my password. I can do a select all from blogs. Hey, cool. Looks like we are connected to our Postgres database from our local running Docker container. So now, great. So let's move on to the next section. So what we're going to do next is we are going to go to our ACR or Rails container registry, and we're going to start deploying up. We're going to push up our image to the container registry, and let's prepare to get it into that app service. So let's head back to our terminal. I'm just going to kill this server already, and we can take a look at, we had Rails on Azure -v1. So what we need to do is we need to specify the container registry and tag our image with that container registry that we want to push it up to. So what I'm going to do a Docker tag. And I think that's not what I want. I want to tag the name of our current image. So Docker images. Let's grep by Rails on Azure. Cool. So I have Rails on Azure v1 that I have here. So let's do a Docker tag Rails on Azure v1, and we're going to take the name of our container registry here. So we can just take actually this whole login server is what we're going to need. So that's basically the name of our remote registry. So this is how you would specify it for an Azure container registry though. So we're just going to name this image the same thing, Rails on Azure v1, and then we'll just do v1. So we have our tagging the current image that we have, Rails on Azure v1. Then we're specifying the Azure container registry that we want to push this up to, / the name of the image, and then finally the image version. So let's hit enter. Docker images, we can just go up there, Rails on Azure. I can see that this is tagged properly. And now I'm going to need to do an ACR login. And it does look like you will need the Azure CLI. So if you do not have the Azure CLI, go ahead and head to the Azure CLI install. You can find that there. Click into how to install the Azure CLI and follow through with the whatever instructions that you need. And then I will pause this video. Once that's done installing, come back and let's continue on. All right, so once you've installed the Azure CLI, what we're going to do is let's go ahead and log into Azure from our console. So we'll prompt you. This is the one I'm going to sign in as. Awesome. And just to double check, we can do an AZ account show. And I can see that I'm in the correct username. I recognize this as my subscription, so I'm in the right subscription that I'm deploying to, because the services I'm running, again, are in this subscription, so that's correct. Just double check that on your end. The name of your subscriptions should match the name from the AZ account show, that name property. So once I've done that, I'm going to do an AZ ACR login -n, and that -n is going to be the name of my Azure account. Let's go ahead and pull that back. So I'll head over to my browser, copy this name, head back to my terminal, paste that in. And and we wait. Awesome, login succeeded. So now I'm just going to do a Docker images again, that grep. Going to copy this name. I'm going to do a Docker push, paste that name, and then I'm going to add in the tag here. So I have this tag v1. So I'm going to paste in what I just pasted from the name of my image, colon v1. Sweet, looks like it had finished. So we can go back to our container registry on the browser. Go down to repositories, and we see that our repository is just the name of the Docker image. And so if you click into there, you can see the tag that we just pushed up. So this is the version, for example, of our application that's running. From here, now that that's there, it looks like our Docker image, we verified that it runs locally and connecting to our PostgreSQL database. We pushed it up to the Azure Container Registry. So now what we need to do is prep the Azure App Service. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just copy over all of the app settings that we have. So we have the list of app settings in our, we have the list of app settings set from, for example, from our Docker container, and we're going to add these as app settings to our Azure App Service. So head down to environment variables, and let's just start adding them. So again, even though I have app setting underscore DB name, all I really need is the DB name, and App Service will append the app setting underscore, or prepend the app setting underscore for us. So let's go and do this. It's going to be PostgreSQL. That's what we're looking to add there. So we go ahead and click apply, DB user. So this one's a bit different. So what we need for the DB user is going to be that connected. Never mind. We're just going to do Postgres admin. Postgres admin. I don't know if I spelled that correctly. I think post. That's okay. I did. All right. Postgres admin. Then let's do the DB password, which is going to be our super secret password. Again, I'm going to delete all of this, so please don't add me. All right. And then DB host. So DB host. So the DB host, we can go ahead and pull that from here again. So again, that's going to be the Azure Postgres.database name, apply. So, and the last one we're going to need is going to be that secret key base here. Click apply. Awesome. So something that we have, or forgot to click apply here. So now that we're adding the secret key base, this reminds me of one more thing we're going to need to do is we'll need to head back to our editor, and we're going to head to our production. We can throw this in. I'll do it at the very bottom here. What we're going to say here is the config.secret underscore key underscore base is equal to, we'll just say the environment of app setting underscore key or secret underscore key underscore base. So all this is saying is that you know, expect this environment variable instead. And oh, it's not the correct way. I should have this as brackets, and just for failsafe too, in case if you're not, you know, only planning to deploy this to Azure and want to test something out, we'll default back down to that that normal environment variable. So once we have that, let's go ahead and head back to our terminal. First let's tag. So actually let's build this as a separate I kind of messed that up already, but we'll build this as a second version. So since we did make this change to the production.rb for changing that secret key base, let's build it with a new version. And we're going to go ahead and tag .v2 and v2 here as well. And then we'll push to that Rails container, or that Azure Container Registry, and we're going to push the second version that we just built. So now we have pushed up the new version. So you can take a look at our Rails registry here. Let's head back to our repositories. Go to that Rails on Azure. We can see that they're v2. That is with that secret key base environment variable change. So let's go back to the Azure App Service. Our environment variables, let's just double check that those were saved correctly. Looks like that they were taken, so awesome. So now let's go ahead and attempt to publish. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to use system managed identity. So our system assigned identity. So this, if you click from the Azure web app, we're going to go to the identity settings. Let's toggle this on. What this will do is under the hood, so I guess it's called Microsoft Entra now, which is kind of the whole identity management based on identity management to have permissions, or like set up roles and permissions towards different Azure resources. System assigned is saying that I want to assign an identity basically to the web app that can then be used to access other Azure resources. What this system's assigned identity will allow me to do is now I can head back to the Rails Azure ACR. I can go to the access control from here. We'll click on add role assignment. And I need the ACR pool. So what I'm saying for this role assignment is I need to give permissions to my web application. So it's that Azure App Service to allow the web app to pull the images from this Azure Container Registry. So after I selected the role, which is ACR pool, I click on members, select manage identity, click select members, click on app service. And this one I have 2 for building. So it's going to be the application of your choice. Review and assign, review and assign. Let me just check. I'm going to check access here just to make sure that it's signed, because so I'll select app service. Okay, ACR poll was assigned. Looks like that went through just fine. Portal's not working for some reason. So let's go back to our Azure, our web app that we've set up. And what we can do is go to the deployment center. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to set up the container registry and what image it should be pulling from, etc. So what we're going to do is associate with the container registry. It's going to be an ACR. It's going to be single container. It's a container type. Registry source, we're going to click on Azure Container Registry. From our subscription ID is going to be that ID that you used. Authentication, let's just click on Managed Identity. It's going to be system assigned. Rails is the name of the one I want. So we have to manually add this in. There is another way where we could do based on admin credentials, but in the meantime, I'll just do this through Managed Identity. So I'm going to split up another window. Go ahead and open up another window with this resource group or with the Azure portal. And you can search for here, for example, container registries. I'm going to go down to repositories and the container registry, click on the repository I want. Just want to copy this name. Go back to your web app, type in the image or copy paste the image name there. For the tag, I want to set v2, and I think that should be good. So if we just save this, what it's going to do is save the container configuration, and it should pull down our image for us. You can click on logs here. So there are 2 places you can kind of monitor logs. One is in the deployment center. There's this logs section. And we can see that images are being pulled already starting. One that I do find better for logging is going to be the log stream. And so here you'll get, this may take a bit. It does take some time to fully pull the application. So this is the one downside I would say that I've experienced, is that it just does take a while. And a lot of the logging can be very difficult to parse through and figure out what exactly is wrong. Okay, so I found the error of why this failed. So this is a really difficult one. So rails/bin / docker entry point. So what this file is, I'll hop back to my editor, is under the bin folder. You're going to have this docker entry point, and this is just prepared by the Rails new, which this gets built into the Docker file as the entry point here on line 58. So what this is doing is just saying if you see a Rails server, that command has been run, then let's go ahead and kick off the Rails db prepare, and then exec that command that was listening on for that. So it's just being able to run a Rails db prepare on as part of like the startup of the container. The issue that I have is that I'm on a Mac, which is a AMD based architecture, and not a AMD. It's an ARM based chip, and the only versions that they support are AMD or x86 64. So, all right. So what I need to do is I need to build this Docker image as a x86 architecture. So for example, AMD 64 instead of an ARM-based chip. I'm on a Mac Silicon device. So if you are on a Mac Silicon device, you'll need to go through this. If not, go ahead and skip this section. So what we'll do is docker build x build. We'll specify the platform to be explicitly Linux /AMD 64. We'll give this a tag of the Rails on Azure. And let's give this a v3. So take a look at the image that was created. So we've created this Rails on Azure v3. What we need to tag it with now is our Azure Container Registry. So docker tag Rails on Azure v3, and we'll just copy this other line here, Rails on Azure v3. And now let's push this up to the registry. All right, now that it's pushed up, let's hop over to our browser, close out some of these windows here. Don't need those. All right, so let's go to our Rails app. I'm in the web app again. Please don't crash on me. All right, we're good. So I'm in our Azure App Service or Azure Web App. So let's head down to the Deployment Center tab again, which is under Deployment. Cool. Let's go to System Assign, Azure here. Let's change this tag to v3. Again, we built that image with the v3, so we can just flip that over, click on Save, the Save button, save our container configuration. And just to be absolutely sure, let's just kick off a restart of the application. And let's view those beautiful logs. So let's just do a hard refresh. And we can open up the logs as well through the Deployment Center. Sometimes, I don't know, I just like to check both areas because one will give me sometimes more than the other. All right, I can see here on line this container line. So creating container with image. This looks like the image that we had specified in our deployment center. Starting container. Container is running here and doesn't look like there are any issues. So let's just hop over to our application and open it. So what you can do is, let's just hop over to our application and open it. So you click on the browse here and looks like we're able to open our blog, and that blog is pulling from our PostgreSQL. So we can see that we're going to have that we already have that one blog in there from when we ran it locally. So our app is successfully deployed to Azure. And one thing to notice too, right, regarding that TLS termination is that Azure App Service provides it for us automatically. So we don't need to worry about setting that up with our Rails app. It's provided by Azure App Services. So thankfully for this name, or at least the domain that's given to you, it's up and running. Let's go ahead and just create a new blog, a new one on Azure, new one, create. Looks like it's there. Let's destroy it. Wonderful. Back to that single blog. So looks like we were able to get our app successfully deployed. All right, well, that concludes this video. Hopefully you enjoyed the walkthrough on how to deploy a Rails 7 application to Microsoft Azure, having that Rails app be bundled into a Docker image, pushed up to an Azure Container Registry, have our data hosted on Postgres through an Azure managed service, and also have our app running, of course, within an Azure App Service as an Azure web app. So for the next one, and let me know in the comments below if there are any other topics or applications that you would like to see deployed to Azure. Hopefully I'll catch you on the next one. This is never late, and it's never late to code.